Welcome to the first in a new series of EdSource Roundtables. My name is Ann Vasquez, the new Executive Director of EdSource. For 44 years, EdSource has been at the center of the conversation around the most pressing education issues in California and around the nation. Today, at our virtual roundtable, we will talk about California's community colleges and what's needed to prepare for a post-pandemic workforce. According to the US Bureau of Labor, almost 10 million people remain unemployed, more than 4 million than in February of 2020, before the pandemic began. As more jobs require at least some education beyond high school, California's 116 community colleges are in a critical position to help improve the economic mobility of more than 2 million students each year. I would like to thank our sponsors. This roundtable is made possible thanks to the support of the College Futures Foundation. We'd also like to thank the Lumina, Stepsky, and Kresge Foundations as well for their support of EdSource's higher education work. If you haven't already, we encourage you to join our community network, as well as to sign up for our daily newsletter as a way to foster an ongoing conversation around students, equity, and education. Now, to introduce our panelists, I am very pleased to introduce at our roundtable today, the Chancellor of California Community Colleges, Eloy Ortiz Oakley. Thank you for being here today. Please also welcome Tony Carnevale, Research Professor and Director of the Georgetown University Center on Education and the Workforce. Next, we have Alex Davis, Assistant Vice Chancellor of Economic and Workforce Development at Rancho Santiago Community College District. Also with us today is Chauncey Lennon, Vice President for Learning and Work at the Lumina Foundation. And we have Sergio Rosas, CEO and founder of Makeshift Learning, who is also a workforce development and learning entrepreneur. And finally, and last but not least, our moderator today is EdSource higher education reporter, Ashley Smith. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for taking time out of your day to talk about a very important issue. Ashley, why don't you go ahead and kick things off?
Thanks, Ann. So I would like to start by talking with Chancellor Oakley first about the role that community colleges have played in career training. Typically, the community colleges have two roles, transfer and direct career training, and more often than not, they have to do both at the same time. But how has the pandemic changed how the community colleges educate and train people for this new economy?
Thank you for the question, Ashley. Good to see you, and thank you to EdSource for bringing us together. This is an important topic. It always is an important topic, but particularly now, post-pandemic, after all that we've seen, after how hard communities like the ones served by the California community colleges have been hit, it's especially important. So, and as we look toward a recovery, we need to see a recovery with equity at the center of this to make sure that we're reaching the workers, the adult learners that have been hit the hardest. So the California community colleges, as you mentioned, this is our mission, is to serve these hard-hit populations. We have, as you mentioned, the role of helping students transfer to a four-year university, helping students find a career pathway, as well as lifelong learning. But that is all melding all together. There's really very little space between those missions. There is no more this either or situation. It's not college or career, it's college and career. It is a continuation of lifelong learning. There is no one and done anymore in this economy. You get your a certificate, you get an AA, you transfer, but you have to continue to reskill and upskill in this economy. So the first thing that we're focused on is meeting our students where they're at. That's such an important issue to focus on, because we are traditionally have been brick and mortar institutions. We open our doors, fall semester, spring semester. We offer some courses in between, but that is no longer how particularly adult learners are able to access us. The pandemic has really taught us how to better reach learners wherever they're at, using technology that we have and have really learned to leverage, adjusting our schedules to meet our workers where they're at. Those are the things that we have learned are critically important to having a recovery with equity, because as we saw in the pandemic, communities of color and low-income communities have been hit the hardest. Adult learners were hit the hardest. Our enrollment declined, predominantly adult learners. And then you couple that with the changes that employers are making in automation to the economy, the number of jobs that have been lost in this pandemic. We really have to approach this with urgency and put a clear focus on helping adult learners get the skills that they need in order to have a chance for a good paying job, a job that provides them dignity in this new economy.
One hand, we hear that Americans are rethinking what they want out of work. Millions of Americans are quitting their jobs and moving on to either a better position or they're returning to school to upskill. But at the same time, as Ann mentioned earlier, we have nearly 10 million people who are unemployed. We have our community colleges in California with enrollment decreases, as you mentioned, Chancellor Oakley. So what exactly is happening in this economy? What's going on here? Tony, Chauncey, do you guys want to weigh in?
Well, there are two things that are relatively clear in our future, say to 2030. One is the demography, which is, it's very good news for places where I work, Georgetown. That is, there's going to be a lot more families with 2 BAs at the head of household and the money that goes with that. So the market for selective colleges is going to grow. A lot of institutions will try to either join the selectives, the 4-year schools, but the selectives are going to be fine. In fact, they'll do better if they want. And then there's the fact that the overall size of the college age population is going down. So that means that even as the selectives have bigger markets to play with, the downstream 2-year institutions and non-selective 4-year schools are going to be in trouble. Most of the decline will come in the East. There's only growth moving west and northish. But the growth that we're seeing is all coming in families with less education at the top of the household. So it's a population that's can afford higher education less and so on. The other thing, the economy looks like it's going to be fine, notwithstanding arguments about inflation, but our current projection is that there'll be about 168 million jobs in 2030. 40% of those jobs will be for people with BAs or graduate degrees, 30% for people with less than a BA and more than high school, and about 30% for those in high school. But the important thing as well is 75% of the BA jobs will be good jobs, eventually making at least 65 grand. About 45% of the middle skill jobs will be good jobs, and only between 17 and 20% of the high school jobs will be good jobs. So, I mean, the general direction of the economy and demography promises scarcity, which is good and bad news, depending on who you are in the system.
Just to add another layer to what Tony has sketched out, I think the other thing to keep our eye on is as the economy and the demand for skills gets more and more kind of specialized, community colleges are going to have to think about how they really deepen their connection to different kinds of industries and occupations, and how they build kind of pathways from what they do, education and training, over to industry. That trend is just going to continue. One thing that I think is very exciting about California is the recent investments in what are called high road training partnerships. These are essentially efforts to bring together industries that are creating a lot of the good jobs, the 30% of these good jobs Tony mentioned that are going to pay good wages but not require a BA. We can't just hope that those workers find those jobs. We've got to build a world in which community colleges work with industry to identify those jobs and then create the kind of pipelines, both in school and bringing people into community colleges who can then benefit from these training programs. So again, I think it's going to be a very bumpy road for a while. Some of the longer term trends are good, but it means we're going to have to invest in new ways of doing business that bring community colleges in closer with business and industry partners.
Speaking of building these connections. Alex, can you tell us a little bit more about what's going on in Southern California? This is something you're directly working with and talking to employers and making these connections. What are you hearing from them, and how has the pandemic perhaps changed your direct relationship, and by your, I mean the college's direct relationship with employers?
Thank you, Ashley. I'd like to first say that the pandemic has shown our colleges how flexible we really are in shifting and migrating courses to remote and online instruction. And then also having sure that we have policies and processes in place that allow for flexible learning options and delivery modems as well, so that we can get ahead of crises like this in the future. And also it taught us to not lose touch with something as simple as communication protocols, sharing of timely and critical information with our ecosystem partners, especially our industry and employer partners, so that we are continuing to develop pathways that are responsive, especially in a pandemic such as this, because the last time I looked, 42% of the unemployment insurance claims came out of LA and Orange County, when you look at the state of California. And so we have to make sure that we are embedding the voices of our industry and employers into the curriculum to make sure that we are developing a talent pipeline that is really responsive to our, the jobs that are needed with our employers. And the one thing that I really would like to say about community colleges is that we're really flexible when it comes to the curriculum and how we deliver programs, whether it's in the virtual space, online space, at partner locations, upskilling incumbent workers, as well as new entrants into the workplace. And so we've got, the state of California has invested in regional directors of employer engagement across all the industry sectors who work as liaisons inward and outward facing to our colleges. And they are at the pulse of what is needed with employers. They're having conversations. They are in advisory councils. They are part of our workforce development boards and their relationship with partners, with employer partners, and getting firsthand information on what skills are needed still in time of a pandemic on top of a recession. I don't think that I've never seen it in my lifetime. So it's something different, it's something new. And I think just having communication and dialogue with not only our ecosystem partners, but our students and our faculty, the ones who are being impacted, and learning about their experiences and how we can set them up for success with delivering curriculum and participating in continued learning are key for us. So I'll stop there and see if anyone else has anything to say, Ashley.
Well, Sergio, why don't you tell us about Makeshift Learning, because you also work with an employer that is looking for employees in the community colleges, and you help to make those connections. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, certainly. And thanks again for the question. So a lot of the work that we do at Makeshift Learning is focused specifically on curriculum and instructional design from the perspective of working with an employer directly. So a lot of this work actually builds on the work that I had the pleasure of working with Alex here in Southern California through a California Career Pathways Trust Fund called LA High Tech, which focused on putting community college students, high school and community college students on pathways to IT, software engineering, design, visual media, arts. And from that initial investment from California, from my perspective, I was looking at the ecosystem and say, where can I add value? And I realized that working hand in hand with an employer, meaning we go into an employer, we actually talk to different levels in terms of managers, hiring managers, to really understand the skills and competencies that folks need, and then from there develop curriculum. And so in this case, we're actually identifying learner personas, meaning we understand like a learner who has prior knowledge on, let's say, software engineering, and what track they need to be in terms of the level of advancement that they need. Alex mentioned this ecosystem approach, and that's something that I want to double down on and talk a little bit more. This isn't something that can be done, particularly when you look at rebuilding an economy with equity in mind. You need to be working with a host of partners, community colleges, workforce development, boards. You need to be working with nonprofit organizations who are building. You need to work with philanthropy, right? To be able to figure out a way to rebuild, right? There are so many different needs. Like, we could be working one day with someone who's 22 years old, born in this country, is really prone in using technology and getting around. But then I look at my dad, he's 65, an immigrant, he's got a 6th grade education. First time in his life, he's been unemployed for more than 14 months after working in restaurants, right? And he's scared of going back to community college because the jobs right now, he can't get a job. So, you know, community colleges have a tough role in terms of making sure that they're addressing different types of learners and their circumstances, right? And so, but you need this ecosystem partnership approach, particularly looking at employers. And I like to reverse engineer and really prioritize figuring out what is it that you need and how do we demystify, right? That actually a lot of community college talent bring in the skills and the capabilities that they need for jobs. It's just, sometimes it's a signaling gap. They may not understand how to talk the talk. And so like you need partners who are able to translate that for them. I was reading a recent New York Times article from a professor at Harvard who said that as many as 30 million workers without 4-year degrees have skills to move into jobs that would pay them 70% more than their current jobs, right? They have the skills. So how do we make sure we transfer those skills in these new employer contexts, given that there are shifting technologies that are pushing the skills even further?
You know, the shifting technology part, the curriculum part, I just want to challenge Chancellor Oakley and Alex a little bit more on whether the community colleges are moving fast enough to meet what these employers are asking for, because there are third parties out there. Google has their own program. There's all types of for-profit and career training programs that, frankly, they've been doing a great job at enrolling adult learners through this pandemic. So it appears to be a challenge for the colleges to actually meet the skill needs that employers are asking for.
This could be a topic of the entire day, but the short answer is no, we're not doing enough, and no, we're not moving fast enough, by no means, any way, shape, or form. We are doing significant amount of work that's important to this area. Things like credit for prior learning, we've made huge gains in the last year. Things like competency-based education, which most institutions that serve adult learners have mastered. If you look at the growth in enrollments, institutions like Western Governors University, Southern New Hampshire, and others who are focused on adult learners and deploy competency-based education have seen great results. We have just started scratching that surface, and of course, EdSource has covered the drama around Calbright, our newest college, which will continue to show the way. But we have to look at nonprofits, for-profits, other institutions. I mean, look at employers. Employers are doing much of their own upskilling now. They're not even considering working with us anymore. The reason for that, and we have to acknowledge, is that we have to become much more flexible, much more focused on upskilling, stacking credentials, giving students opportunities to personalize their needs in ways that we haven't been able to do before. I will end by saying that we have made tremendous progress in the last 2 years, particularly during the pandemic, and I think we're en route to make the changes that we need to make. But we are following a traditional way of teaching and learning that it's going to take a little bit of time to adjust, but we're making those adjustments, and I think we're on path to better serve adult learners going forward.
And Ashley, I'd like to echo what Chancellor Oakley said and add a little bit to that from the employer's perspective. Now, through the LA High Tech Regional Consortium that Sergio spoke about, we made a lot of inroads with our employer partners in changing the narrative on urban education and our community college students, letting them know they're financially challenged, but they're brilliant students, right? And so through partnership with Big Soul Exchange, we were able to have employers like Amazon and Bowango and a lot of the tech companies to hire our students based on competencies and not wait for them to complete a certificate or degree, but then also have employment mandatory for completing and graduating. And so we are starting to work with employers to see if they necessarily need a degree before hiring a student so that they don't miss out on the right talent at the right time. And so those conversations are still going on. Of course, we want our students to complete, we want our students to transfer, but we don't want them to miss out on an opportunity because they lack a degree or certificate. And so industry certifications are critical in that as well. And so that's part of the conversation that we're having with employers at this time to make sure that we're able to get them the talent at the time that they need it before, if it means before they complete a degree or certificate.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I think like this is a bigger conversation around like providing more options for learners, regardless. So community college provide one option, the Googles of the world provide another option, right? But there's a ton of different options, including online as well. Coursera, Udacity, you talk about the different options. And again, it's about choice, but at the same time, it's also supporting our students to figure out which is the best choice for them. So a couple of the chats around the difficulties of online learning, 100% agree. Online learning isn't for everyone. And specifically, you have to really understand that like, it's not just putting an instructor in front of a laptop and then just kind of showing. You need to have an entire network of support, which also means bringing in coaches, bringing in mentors, bringing in folks who could actually realistically ground something that may be abstract and make it more concrete. So project-based learning is like one example of how that can be done. But at the end of the day, right, you really need all of these varieties of modalities to figure out what makes the most sense. And to that point, when we were doing LA High Tech with Alex, there are so many ways we prototyped and piloted and pivoted and like constantly trying new things, which shows the flexibility of the California community colleges to work hand in hand with employers and with partners and tech companies, because I was the one directly responsible alongside with the team to go out there and talk to 60 technology companies. You know, they are also just trying to understand, like, what does it mean when we have these different degrees? Like, what's the subject matter? They want to understand more, right? Before they, and so like, you need time, right? We had a relationship with the same company we started working with in LA High Tech. It's been 6 years. They're making a big investment and offering, right? They've taken it in-house, an 8-week in the company around design, software engineering, augmented reality, and storytelling, right? And that's been a 5-6 year journey with one company. And sometimes that's the type of investment you need in order for companies to understand the talent pool that's in their own backyards.
What is it that employers could do more of? Or what is it, you know, because it is a partnership between community colleges and employers. What is it that they could do to kind of meet halfway?
There's an assumption here that employers know what they're looking for. And I would say that's a bad assumption. I think work that Burning Glass has done, Esri and others have really shown that sometimes, you know, it helps to actually use data to see what are the competencies and skills that go into the work that's happening in employers. So employers have to be open to really taking a hard look. They have used a blunt instrument in the past, a degree or certificate or some other credential, but that doesn't really get at the root of what are the skills and competencies. So I would say just begin there with just employers being open to actually looking at what are the skills and competencies that they truly need to do a particular job.
At Makeshift Learning, we talk about this learning journey, right? When we're constructing our curriculum or our instructional approach, it goes not just for the learner, but includes the employer. There's a learning journey that they also need to go to understand truly what is it that they're looking for, right? And sometimes it's a translation, right? We're oftentimes translating, okay, like I hear these skills and competencies that you're saying, but our community college town also have those skills and talents. So like, where do we need to meet you halfway? Like, and then how do we incorporate that into the curriculum, right? So it is a translation. And again, with employers, you have to spend some time with them in order for them to feel comfortable, for them to understand. It's a lot, and they're taking on the shifting role, right, of like what it means to be an employer. How do we work with community? How do we work with these organizations? Who's the right organization? Who's the right community college? Like there's so many unknowns that I think like as an ecosystem, we can do a lot to have coordinated efforts where we're working hand in hand with them.
Can I go back to a point that got raised earlier about the rise of these new often tech certifications? Chancellor Oakley pointed out, right, that the community colleges are sort of also in this kind of training space. But I think one of the things that we don't really remember is that most certifications are awarded by industry, right? Not by one employer, but by an industry. They often have a lot of return, partly because when you get a certification, you typically then get a license. On the one hand, the industry says you've got the skills. The state says, you're legally able to go do a job. And that leads to work in a particular occupation. The thing that this new round of certifications, they're just a particular company saying you're certified to use our tool or our software. That's all good, right? I hope that those credentials end up having a lot of value, but it's early days. We don't really have a lot of data on most certifications, but these in particular, because they're so new. So I think we've also got to remember that this is a very iterative process. And just because we have a new entrant into the credentialing space, we've got to sort of, look to the data as it comes in to tell us, are these really valuable credentials? Because we have a lot of credentials, as we all know, that don't actually have much value. So I think, a word of caution here, not to simply hope that because something's new, that's something that everybody should now be sort of rushing to adopt.
Let me ask about these credentials and their value in the economy and the workplace, because there's a lot of state and congressional funding that could possibly go into these short-term programs. And so I just want to dig into that a little bit more, Tony and Chauncey, on just, what is the data telling you all now about the value of these credentials?
Well, the politics on this is relatively clear, at least seems to me. I'm pro-training. I come more from the Department of Labor world than the Department of Education world. But, and we've never built a training system in America. To the extent we have, the community colleges and industry-based certification are the two key elements. But it's pretty clear that we've got bipartisan support to expand training and federal support for training under Title IV of the Higher Ed Act. It's there. We've got strong corporate support, bipartisan support on the Hill, less true for degreed education. But we're about to see, although this is not a priority issue, so anything you want to get done over the next 2 years is very iffy. But in any event, it's pretty clear. We're about to do a shift to training, not away from degrees, I think, in the end. But training Pell in the House Democrats' higher education bill, the Jobs Act, the Tim Kaine bill is willing to fund training as little as 5 weeks of training. There are huge issues about how we regulate that, because I think it needs to be regulated. That is, we're going to get transparency on degrees. That's coming like a truck. But then the issue is we need more than transparency on training. We need some sort of economic measures of economic outcomes. And there's a big fight about that, whether it should be, if you go to a post-secondary institution, a lot of people, especially educators other than community college educators, will say that you should make at least the median wage for a high school degree. If we do that, we're not going to have many more certificates that will pass muster. That is, it's much too high. So the other view, mostly from economists, is it should be a value added number. Otherwise, we're not going to have many more certified nursing assistants out there. So there is there's a shift to training that's coming, I think. And I think it's pretty clear in the cards. Don't know if we'll get there within the next 2 years or not, but we'll get there eventually because it's bipartisan.
I would just add on this topic that I think we also got to keep in mind that there's much to be gained by a greater investment in sort of helping subsidize tuition. But we already know that for many of the adults, especially at community colleges, tuition is only one of many barriers, right? Is the program flexible? Is it designed to allow you to work and go to school? Is it affordable given the larger set of costs, right? Costs beyond tuition, and can you really guarantee for most adults? Does this lead to a job, right? So if the system doesn't have the resources to address all those issues in addition to tuition, we're not going to see much of a change either. So I think in thinking about these investments, we obviously should pay attention to the cost of tuition, but we've got to think about the larger package as well.
All of you, I believe, have mentioned about how the colleges should, and they are at times meeting students where they are, but we've gotten a couple of questions from the audience about getting employers to sort of respect on-the-job training, respect sort of the relationship between what they're learning in a classroom, the time that they need, and any other type of responsibilities they have at home. And I'm wondering if you all have any ideas on sort of bridging this issue with employers and how to start those conversations. And maybe if there are any examples of on-the-job training programs at the colleges with students who are going to class and working, that I guess if there are any perfect examples out there of any type of on-the-job training for students that respects, that they have complicated lives.
I don't want to just put it on students. I also want to put it on employers. Employers require onboarding and training themselves, right? Particularly when you're dealing with first generation, low income. I'm a first generation, low income kid, right? If you're from an underrepresented background, you have an intersectional identity, you have certain challenges that you're dealing in your day-to-day life. You may be DACA, you may be undocumented, right? Like the community college system represents a diversity of all of these different factors that go into. And so when you're designing these training programs, like we have to make sure that employers get properly onboarded, right? That they understand the background and the experiences that a lot of our community college talent are coming with. And then it's not just like, hey, I've just placed you and like, cool, just go off and do your own thing. You actually have to build up the infrastructure to make sure that there's a liaison or someone between that's advocating or voicing things and working with employers side by side, right? And it's learning. It's all around learning. That learning journey that I keep talking about, it's the same thing with employers, right? I want to also be mindful, like the relationship goes both ways. The employer has a relationship with students and students have a relationship with the employer. And that should also be factored. And so best practices here is looking for employers that are aligned, right? That value and respect and prioritize equity as part of their overall approach to training and working in community with community colleges, nonprofit partners, the city, the county, the state, right? In order to do that.
I'd like to give an example of a partnership that's working really well in LA and Orange County, and that's with SNAP. SNAP has invested, it was one of the first employers that started providing internships and job placement for two-year students who were normally hiring four-year university students. And so SNAP has developed design and engineering and storytelling academies where they pay our students to go through these academies and they get placed into internships and jobs, not only with SNAP, but businesses and organizations that they are affiliated with. And Sergio knows this well as he was part of that. And so partnerships like that where our employer partners or industry partners take our students who have any prior experience in those areas, but they take them through these academies and invest in them and get them into jobs. And they also take students from our other programs and provide them with internship opportunities. The other thing is that I've done many roundtable focus groups with employers and our faculty. I had a coding academy project across 3 districts in the LA area. And what happened with that academy is that we surveyed our employers who were part of that, who signed on and were committed to onboarding our students. They wanted our students to have 8 weeks of training in the classroom before coming into their places of employment so that they had some competencies. And then the second 8 weeks, they went into paid internships. They were building programs, they were building websites. Some of the foundational elements of running a business, these students were programming that for these employers. And during that 8 weeks of internship, they got a trial period with these students. So they were able to work alongside them and look at them and see if they wanted to continue employment with them. And I will tell you about 70% of our students got hired on with those companies. And it just wasn't tech companies. It was small businesses, big businesses. And so partnerships like that, where the employers invest and they help develop and design the pathway and the work-based learning, which is the laboratory now for career technical education. All of our employers wanted the students to have some experience and be acclimated to those jobs before they step foot in the workplace. So that's a partnership that works really well when both parties are invested for the sake of the students and their workforce.
There are two frontiers on the horizon in education reform, I guess you could call it, and that is one is work-based learning. An idea has arrived when everybody gets its own acronym. So I'm in a lot of conversations where people talk about WBL and nobody else would know what we're talking about. And then there are a lot of reasons why that's the case. One is the collapse of the youth labor market in America since the mid-'80s, and the quality of work that young people get, the extent they get it, is not up to the kinds of learning they need for a career job as many as 10 years down the road. So the other is career counseling. We simply don't have that in America, truthfully. And it's very expensive, and it's not clear how you build it. In some ways, part of the bad news for higher ed is I don't think anybody trusts higher ed to do this, because higher education institutions will always sell whatever they have on the shelf in terms of their programs. But what you want is an information system and a counseling system that looks across a wide variety of institutions and programs. There is agreement sort of among reformers that we need to do occupational exposure in middle school. We need to start doing internships in high school, and in post-secondary, the internship or the work WBL experience needs to be tied to your field of study and so on. So both these domains, both of which are very expensive, are two unfunded pieces of a real system that would connect education in an economic sense. There are other purposes to education, of course. But in an economic sense, we need WBL and we need career counseling. We really don't in any quantity do either, and both are very expensive.
Just going to add to build on what you're saying, Tony, and what you were saying, Alex, with the example of SNAP, because Makeshift Learning continues to work with SNAP, and we're building the curriculum and just launched academies last week, right? So there are community college students with SNAP right now undergoing the training that we've developed. And one best practice is SNAP has taken work-based learning internally, right? So if you look at it from an employer perspective, they're looking to increase employer engagement. Again, retaining their employees is like very critical to the business. And so they're activating close to 400 employees to come in to do everything from guest speaking into the different academies based on the domain. They're there. Every single scholar gets assigned a mentor, and then the mentor is briefed on how to interact, how to work with scholars. They have on Fridays, they have sessions where they're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And so, you know, to some of the comments that were just in the chat that I've been seeing is like, that's like a growing best practice is like, how do you then take WBL internally and help a company embrace that model, because it's wrap around, right? Meaning like, you know, it's not siloed, like here, we're just going to give you these skills and that's it. It also includes professional development, which is a curriculum that we're prototyping right now to make sure that like, not only do you understand like career artifacts that are important, resume, LinkedIn, and portfolio, but that you take a step back and you understand like, what does it mean to have a mission-driven career? What does it mean to like understand like, where can my career go in these various directions, right? How do I plan a future, right? So there are those elements that are also needed, and you really need this integrated approach, and having it within a company provides just, again, that real world context for how a company, like how it looks like to actually work inside of a company for 8 weeks.
Thank you, Sergio. I did want to have Chancellor Oakley chime in, if you could, on Tony's point about career counseling. We do have a couple of questions in the chat as well about whether community colleges could do more with career counseling, especially for first generation students who may not know the career path that they want to choose.
Again, this could be a topic for the entire day, but so the answer is yes. The guided pathways framework that we have been implementing throughout the California community colleges is focused on breaking down a student's journey and ensuring that there is information to guide them. I'll take a step back and say that, you know, what we've been describing here is really the linked learning model, which California has had, which was funded by the Career Pathway Trust in years past, which now the administration is looking at. Again, if you look at the governor's budget, there is a clear focus on learn and earn opportunities, high road training partnerships. This concept of de-risking earn and learn opportunities for the employer and for the student is something that we need to take care of in public policy. We have to create the right incentive structure. So to your question specifically, yes, but there's got to be partnerships with the high schools. Career counseling cannot begin, you know, in the second semester of a community college experience. There has to be career exploration that's done in partnership in communities with high schools and others, and in middle schools. We have, particularly in communities of color, we have to make more people aware of the career opportunities that exist and create easy to navigate pathways. That's ultimately the challenge that we face, is we've created a labyrinth in our education system for students to get through. And that is sort of the heart of this problem. We've got to streamline these processes in a way that we haven't been able to do yet, and leverage technology to help do that.
Let me ask a question from the audience, because we've talked a lot about investments, and California has made significant investments in workforce training and at the community colleges, and there's a strong workforce program. But are there any ways that the state is falling short on funding and supporting some of the partnerships and developing these partnerships between colleges and employers?
So at the risk of giving my opinion before the state budget is done, I'll go first. But I think, you know, there is a serious effort being had here. I mean, I think the one thing that, as Tony mentioned, there is agreement in DC. There's also general agreement in California that we've got to improve the pipeline to the workforce, training, education. So there are areas that we are clearly falling short. Certainly the work-based learning, or whatever you want to call it, earn and learn opportunities. I mean, particularly for adult learners, they have to be able to earn while they learn. Otherwise, they go on to other options that allow them to pay their bills. The other is we've got to invest more in Cal Grant opportunities for our adult learners. We have to help finance their education in the ways that we finance the education of recent high school graduates who go to the CSU or the UC. The cost of education, whether it's short-term training or a four-year degree program, continues to increase. And we have to make it easier for individuals to participate in these programs and get the benefit, the long-term benefit of achieving these credentials.
Are there financial incentives for businesses to do this on the other side, to make these connections? And I'll ask not just in California, because perhaps there are examples outside of the state, but is there much incentive? And we had a question in the audience about small businesses in particular, engaging with colleges for training or on-the-job training or building skills. What type of incentive is there financially for them, and should there be to create these partnerships?
I would say quickly, I'm sure Dr. Carnevale has lots of examples, but there are many examples going on now in our own backyard. I mean, I'm in Orange County. Disneyland has Disney Aspire. They finance the education of their own cast members. And there are tax incentives for employers to be able to support that. And then there are organizations like Guild Education who are making it easier for employers to access those benefits and educate their employees. Walmart, Amazon, you name it, Chipotle, they're all doing it. The issue now is, how do we do it for the smaller businesses? And I think working with industry sectors is a way to do that. And I think the work that Alex does and the LA Orange County Consortium and the other consortiums is a way to get at that. But yes, there are lots of ways that employers can tap into incentives that allow them to better educate their own employees.
The only, I agree with all that. It's exactly what I would have said. But one other thing, and that is that the standard solution for this, and it's mostly something the Labor Department has done with its training programs, which are relatively insignificant in terms of scale, is you've got to have consortia. That is, you've got to find a way for small businesses to get together and give them some. The old days, everybody talked about tax credits. Nowadays, I think we talk about appropriations. I don't know. There has to be power given to the educator because I do not think we should give all the power on training to the employer because the educator has a different mission, which begins with the person and the person's work values, work interests, and so on. And their own vision of who they want to become and how they can live more fully in their time, in the economy, and in the culture. So my own bias is there has to be shared power here. The educator represents the student. The employer, in a sense, represents the job, not really the worker unless they have a union. So I think these are the cutting edge of change in American education, in the economy. It's stuff everybody, the California linked learning is one primary example, but there are at least 20 of these things going on around America. Everybody's messing with WBL and with this. The career counseling piece is still wandering out there somewhere. Nobody knows where it is or how it's going to get done. It's too damned expensive. There are views that we could use retraining of existing counselors to get this done, which is the most optimistic thing I've heard. But this is the cutting edge of where we're headed. Community colleges are, in that sense, the pivotal, in my judgment, the pivotal institution. I also believe firmly, Joe Biden had to back off free college, wasn't going to get that, and went to free community college and combined that with 2 years in preschool. So I thought it was an ingenious, actually, I didn't see it coming. I thought it was an ingenious move because in the end, they're right. If you put in preschool and free community college, you've extended the system by 4 years. The only problem with that is you got to find a way to get people from, those who want to, get from community college to the BA. The way you do that, as far as I can tell, is allow community colleges to give BAs, especially in occupational or industry areas that are where there's hiring in local or regional economies. And, you know, California is pretty good on all this, but and mandate transfer into public. You can't do this with privates, I think, but into public four-year institutions. There's a whole set of, I mean, one of the things we know about education now more than ever in the last 10 years or so is that it's all one system from preschool to the first good job, which on average for a young American now comes between the ages of 28 and 32. In 1970, you achieved economic independence by a fixed measure by age 25. Using that same measure, it now takes to age 32. So it's a long journey, and it has to be filled with education, training, work-based learning, social supports, counseling, and a lot of that is just not there in the American system.
We think about this employer community college partnership, you know, the capacity of the community colleges to really lead here, because as much as we want employers stepping in, there are many ways in which, you know, they don't have a sort of wide enough view of how some of the skills shifts are happening in their industry. You know, they are thinking about what they need to think about, which is the sort of viability of their own business. We need to build the capacity of somebody to understand industries, industry change, and the workforce pipelines that go into those industries. Where we've seen success, it's when that capacity exists on the community college side. We don't have anything, we don't have a policy, we don't do that in any intentional way, invest in the sort of capacity to build these kinds of partnerships. Again, California is out in the lead with some of its investments, but we really need to see this across the board if we're going to take what have been some episodic good examples and turn that into a kind of fundamental piece of our system.
Can I just add, I want to add something that we did in the LA Orange County Regional Consortium. Our 15 district leaders commissioned some research to understand how these hard to convert CTE programs can be remedied for our students and employers, especially when it came to welding and automotive and nursing and culinary arts and fire technology. So what we did is we had researchers to come in and have conversations with about 13 states and practitioners, faculty, educators, administrators, to talk about remedies of making sure that these programs are still viable and available, especially with our employer partners. And so we are working with various platforms to make sure that virtual technology is available in person and online, so that our students and our faculty are able to get professional development in using these technologies, because many of our students and faculty never taken an online class or delivered an online class. And so this is a critical piece into economic recovery, as well as we continue to reopen and decide how we're going to deliver services. All of our community colleges have planned to have some type of hybrid approach for those who want to be there in person and those who want to continue online as well. But I just wanted to add that little piece that we are continuing to invest in research that helps give us the kinds of data that we need to make decisions, not only with our community colleges, but also with our, and I keep referring to ecosystem partners because it's really critical, right? It's really critical that everybody in the community or the region or the state has a role to play with setting our students and our faculty up for success. And one of the last things I want to say is take a look at the LA Deal, ladeal.org. It is led by Bill Allen of LAEDC and David Rattray with Unite LA, and they have brought together another ecosystem of partners to help remedy the digital divide and digital equity in LA County. And so that's a huge project that's on its way, and it really is making an impact in the county of LA. That may have been a little off, but I had to throw that in, Ashley. So thank you for that time.
It's okay. Well, because we're getting close to our time here, but I do want to just ask one last question, because we have gotten a couple of comments from people, or a couple of questions from people saying that they just simply don't know where to start. If you are a student and you're interested in workplace training programs, where could they go? If you're an employer who wants to partner with a community college, who do they turn to? Where would you all suggest be maybe the first place that they look?
Well, first of all, if you're an employer, contact your closest community college and just start there. There are a number of people like Alex working in the field who can quickly help an employer understand what are the options available, not just at that college, but throughout the region. We are set up in regions and we work together in those regions to provide solutions to employers. If you're a student, again, you can go to your local community college, you can go to the Chancellor's Office website, get access to information about the various career programs that exist throughout the 116 community college system. So there's a lot of good information out there, as well as information about how to pay for it. Quickly. Larry Gordon mentioned a question in the chat about why don't community colleges pay more for marketing to get the word out. I would just ask our reporters out there not to focus so much time and effort on how much a college actually pays for its marketing, because we do need to get the word out. We are in a situation where the for-profit industry certainly outstrips us in terms of the amount of money that's out there. But it is a function that we need to do a better job, and we need to work together with our community to make sure that they understand that this is a worthwhile investment.
I want to thank the panel for joining me and turn it over to Ann.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you all for all the panelists. Such wonderful insight today. Thank you to the audience for many great questions that really prompted great discussion. And thank you to our funders who really make these types of roundtables possible. Have a great week, everyone.